Okay.
Yes, Pak.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our international webinar organized by the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Indonesia. The title of the webinar today is Fighting for Independence Continues in Tibet Despite Chinese Repression. So you can watch this webinar on our YouTube TV channel live, as well as later on we will post it on our website also. Welcome once again. Good afternoon, everybody. All the speakers, Mr. Mahesh Ranjan, Ibu Dina Prapto Raharja, and others. Today's topic is Fighting for Independence Continue in Tibet Despite Chinese Repression. But actually, China claims Tibet as its own, but Tibetan people claims that it is an independent country for several centuries. So so that's why. But actually, today is a very important day in the Tibetan history, because exactly 110 years ago, the 13th Dalai Lama declared Tibet as a sovereign and independent country on this day, that is February 13, 1913. So this Tibet independence was proclaimed much before the establishment of the People's Republic of China, which was proclaimed its independence and founding on October 1st, 1949. But we must remember, Tibet has been an independent country, independent kingdom for more than 2,000 years. Sometimes it was a protectorate of foreign rulers. It was occupied by some foreign powers like Mongols, Chinese emperors, as well as British. So it is a very short period, but it has been an independent sovereign country for a long time. So today we have 4 prominent speakers. One is from the US, Harvard University, and he is Mr. Lobsang Sangay. And also we have Legend Shokin Chauhan, and we also have Ibu Dina Dina Prapto Raharja from Indonesia, and also we have Mr. Mahesh Ranjan Debata from India. And also, today I am working as in a dual role. That is, I'm a moderator as well as I'm speaker also. Thank you very much. So now first we will begin with our first speaker, who is unfortunately is not joining here because of the time difference, because he lives in Harvard University. It is now 2 o'clock in the morning. So he expressed his sorry. So we have Lobsang Sangay. Lobsang Sangay, a Tibetan scholar and a political leader, is also working as a senior visiting fellow at East Asian Legal Studies Program, Harvard Law School. He was a democratically elected Sikyong, the president of the Central Tibetan Administration, and served 2 terms from 2011 to 2021. Lobsang was born in 1968 in Darjeeling, India. He is now an American citizen. He completed his BA and LLB from Delhi University. He did his LLM master's degree and PhD from Harvard Law School, and received Young K. Kim Memorial Prize for his excellence in dissertation and contribution to the understanding of East Asia at the Harvard Law School. He has written numerous books as well as op-eds in major newspapers, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and appeared on many international TV networks like BBC and CNN. So now let us play the video, please.
Hello, all the participants of the conference. I want to thank Viramala for organizing this event, and Center for Southeast Asian Studies program in Jakarta, Philippines. This is a bit uncommon to have an event organized in Southeast Asia on the issue of Tibet. So this is very, very much appreciated. But actually, looking back, Philippines in Southeast Asia played very important role when Tibet was invaded and occupied by PRC in 1950s and early 60s. For example, 3 resolutions were moved at the United Nations in 59, 61, 65, all passed. And Ireland and Malaysia were at the forefront, supported by Philippines, to table the resolution at the United Nations General Assembly, debate about it, and finally passed 3 resolutions. So Philippines has a great history of standing with Tibetan people and standing for justice and human rights. And today's initiative is a revival of that great legacy. So I have been to Philippines in Jakarta. I love the country and the people, and your hospitality, much appreciated, and today's event is very much appreciated. Now the topic is the freedom struggle of Tibetan people continues despite suppression by China. Absolutely, for 5 reasons. Number 1, the great 14th Dalai Lama and his vision. Number 2, spirit, solidarity, and resilience of Tibetans in Tibet. Number 3, exiled Tibetans, democratization of government exile. Number 4, India and its people, their generosity has helped us survive and sustain and strengthen our movement. Number 5, international community, especially friends of support all over the world, and also particularly in the West, in America and European countries, for supporting us for all these years. So these are the 5 reasons why Tibetan freedom struggle is alive, kicking, and strong. Now let me elaborate one by one. As far as, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, as we all know, he was born in a poor, farmer's family in Amdo. And from there, he was enthroned at the age of 16 when the invasion of, the Chinese army was imminent. All the adults gave the authority to 16-year-old boy, His Holiness Dalai Lama, to take on the leadership, to deal with the crisis. And he did the best he could to encourage people, inspire Tibetans in Tibet. Went to China in 1954, spent 11 months there, talked to Mao Zedong, talked to Zhou Enlai, the Prime Minister, and Chu Te, to convince them to be more lenient on Tibetans, to introduce reform after consulting and seeking approval of the Tibetan people, which they all agreed. A 17-point agreement was signed on that, which was signed under duress, but that was the crux of the understanding. But Communist Party of China turned out to be very conniving. They betrayed all the hopes and the trust of the Tibetan people. Finally, Tibet was invaded, illegally occupied, and brutally suppressed, which forced His Holiness the Dalai Lama and 80,000 Tibetans to come to India. After coming to India, again, 23 or 4 years old Dalai Lama, led Tibetan people, encouraged them in refugee camps. We had nothing. But single-handedly, he visited all the refugee camps. He visited all the schools, rebuilt monasteries. So all the major monasteries destroyed in Tibet was rebuilt in India. Our Buddhist civilization was revived in India, thanks to the vision and leadership of great 14th Dalai Lama. Number 2, the spirit, solidarity, and resilience of Tibetans inside Tibet. When Chinese army came, more than 1 million Tibetans perished because of war, persecution, imprisonment, and of hunger, all kinds of reasons, but the spirit continued, right? Resilience continued. Even in Tibet are fighting for the cause. There are protests, silently, publicly, vocally, and we all know fact that 157 or 8 Tibetans have committed self-immolation. They burned themselves. Few of them just last year. That shows how desperate Tibetans are, but also how determined Tibetans are, that they want to say, we will sacrifice ourselves, but we'll fight for cause. And that our aspirations to see the return of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom, basic freedom for Tibetans, must be provided by the Chinese government and supported by the international community. So Tibetan spirit is very strong inside Tibet. Just listen to some of the singers in Tibet. They're singing songs in praise of their identity, how proud of their culture, language, So Tibetans from all walks of life, whether they're nomads, farmers, intellectuals, even the Communist Party members, right? But their heart and their mind is with the Tibetan people and Tibet as a nation. So that's number 2, why our freedom struggle continues even today. Number 3, exiled Tibetans and the democratization of Tibetan government exile or Tibetan community, right? His Holiness gifted us democracy, exiled Tibetans embraced it. We rebuilt all the major monasteries, as I said, and built settlements, schools, monasteries. Now, Tibetan government exile is the most well-run government exile, bar none. There are around 100 million refugees and people in diaspora, but among all of them, the most organized administration in exile is the Central Tibetan administration. So we all should be very proud of it. It is democratic, right? And it's functioning and it delivers. We run our own schools, we run our own hospitals, we run our own bank, we run our own semi-embassies all over the world. And the Tibetan communities and the organizations all over the world connected and integrated very, very well. So exiled Tibetans have played major role, and now the younger generation who are getting better education, better exposure will provide far, far, far better leadership for the Tibetan freedom movement. So that's number 3. Number 4 is India and its people. Without the generosity of India and its people and its great leader in 1950s, 60s, who provided us shelter and made us not just survive, but sustain and strengthen. So that's the reason why we are strong today. Now, lately, even in India, there is a realization that, perhaps PRC, especially Communist Party of China, may not be trusted because of the repeated incursions in the border area, hostile actions from Doklam in 2015 in Sikkim, Bhutan and area, and Galwan Valley in May, June of 2020 in Ladakh, and recently in Arunachal Pradesh, just a few months ago, the incursions and the fist fights between Indian and Chinese troops, which Indian troops pushed them back, clearly indicate that the PLA soldiers are a bit hostile and aggressive towards Indian side, and the sovereignty of India is under challenge. Now, why I say this is growing realization, because historically, there was never a land border between India and China. It was always a border between India and Tibet. 3,000 miles long border, 3,000 plus. It was with India. History of Tibet. Shagaba wrote to Indian Prime Minister saying, help us. If you help us now, it will help you too. Because presently we have barely 80 or so soldiers guarding 3,000-mile-long border, right? If you don't help us now, India will pay a heavy price, and it has become a reality. Now, if you look at the border, not 80, not 8,000, not 80,000, but hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers in this cold weather are guarding the border areas of India because the Chinese have come to the other side. So India has paid the heaviest price, and also this remains a major challenge. Asia prosper, as Asia becomes rich and powerful, the tensions and conflicts are bound to happen. And Indo-China conflict is much talked about, but actually historically there was no Indo-China border. It was always between India and Tibet. So Tibet is the reason. Tibet is the buffer zone. Tibet is the cause or the reason for the conflict if it happens. The Tibet issue, you will never understand Indo-China land border. Also, Tibet is a source of major rivers of Asia, right? You just name it. In Philippines in South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Salween, all flow from Tibet. Hundreds of millions are dependent on these rivers, and the source of these rivers is Tibet. Brahmaputra for northeast of India and Bangladesh, again, originates in Tibet. Satluj River and Indus River, which is the lifeline both for India, particularly Kashmir area, and Pakistan, both even for China, right? The Yangtze River and Yellow River both originate in Tibet. And even the Chinese environmentalists are saying we must protect the Tibetan plateau for the sake of Chinese people that are dependent on water flowing from Tibet. So even the Chinese environment is saying we must declare Tibet as a national reserve, or national park to protect it for our own sake. And Tibet is many minerals, you just name it, uranium, gold, copper, lithium. Obviously, we all know Xinjiang has iron and petrol, and Inner Mongolia, 90% of rare earth of China comes from Inner Mongolia, so on and so forth. So very important. And now India has, in fact, the whole of Asia is realizing how important Tibet is. So that's the reason. Number 4. Number 5 is international community. Friends of Tibet all over, Buddhist centers all over the world. They've been the foot soldiers who carried the Tibetan struggle, carried our flag in the streets and the corners of various capitals and various towns and villages that kept the Tibetan freedom struggle alive for all these years, for which we are very grateful, and particularly in the Western countries, right? America being in the forefront, European countries, also recently in Japan, parliamentary support group in the whole world, right? Recently they formed a coalition caucus, people of human rights violation, and there is, caucus where more than 100 Japanese parliamentarians have joined and be part of it, and they passed resolution also in the parliament condemning human rights violations of Uyghur Tibetans and Mongolians. So these are all thanks to the support of international community why Tibetan cause is still alive. And as far as the United States is concerned, in 2020 they passed Tibetan Policy Support Act 2020. Now it's a law in the US to support Tibet. And then there are several resolutions have been passed in the Czech Republic and few European countries as well. So international community have played vital role in supporting the cause of Tibet. So number 1, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. Number 2, Tibetans inside Tibet, 6 million of them, solid, strong. Number 3, exiled Tibetans. Number 4, India and Indian people. Number 5, international community and international governments. You know, these 5 fingers end the Tibetan freedom struggle, for which we are people in Philippines and Southeast Asia revived that same spirit for justice, which you led in 1959, 61, 60. Thailand, you know, and Philippines were in the forefront, supporting the cause of Tibet. Please continue to have this kind of, be with us till, you know, basic freedom of Tibetan people is realized and His Holiness Dalai Lama return to Tibet. Till then, I would like to again thank Center for Southeast Asian Studies for organizing this conference and all the participants. And you have very impressive list of speakers. And I have just summarized 5 key points as to why Tibetan freedom struggle continues despite this, despite suppression by China. And the impressive speakers will elaborate on these 5 points and many other comprehensive issues to make this conference a very successful, informative, educational event. Thank you very much. Dashi Delek Tujiche.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Lobsang. It was an excellent speech. He gave a complete picture of what is the current situation of Tibet in under Chinese rule. So actually in 1949, the Public Republic of China invaded Tibet and it continued until 1950. So since then until now, almost 73 years, China has been repressing Tibetan people, but Tibetan people have been fighting for their freedom, because I think he mentioned also about India, because there is no land border between India and China. That's right, because only the border they have was only between India and independent Tibet, because from 1913 to until 1949, there were so many foreign diplomatic missions were existed in Lhasa, the Tibetan capital. So at the time, the 3,000 kilometers long border were guarded by only 75 Tibetan soldiers. So then the China occupied Tibet, and now it says it claims some parts of India also as its. So that's why the tensions between the China and India are continuing still today. Now we will have the next speaker, Mr. Ledjen Sokin Chauhan is I think is available. Yeah. Okay. Welcome to our webinar, sir. Welcome to the webinar. Yeah. So I will introduce his profile. Can you place the profile of Mr. Shaukin? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Lieutenant Shaukin Chauhan is a distinguished army general from India. So he was the chairman of the ceasefire monitoring group in August 2018. He was the Director General of Assam Rifles, India's oldest and largest paramilitary force. He has held several key appointments during his long career in the army. He has served at the apex level in the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Home Counterinsurgency, Counter-Terrorism, Border Guarding, and Human Resource Management. He also has vast experience in military diplomacy, since he was the defense attaché in the Indian Embassy in Nepal for 3.5 years. He did his PhD in International Relations and Defense Studies from the Punjab University, Chandigarh. He regularly contributes articles, columns in various scholarly magazines, and is a constant invitee and participant speaker at various international seminars and leadership forums, including the IDSA, and Defense Services Staff College, the Army War College, the Officers Training Academy, the Armored Corps Center and School, the United Service Institute, the FICI, and the Foundation and the National Security Guard. So this is Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan's profile. So now the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Virmala,
Yeah.
for inviting me. It's indeed a pleasure and a great honor to speak at something which is very close to my heart. As Mr. Viramala gave out and told you about me, I have been in the Indian Army as an officer for 40 years. That means I joined the Indian Army in 1976 and superannuated only in 2020. That means 44 years I actually served in uniform. Many of these years were served along the Indian, we call it Indo-China, but I agree, it's actually the Indo-Tibet border. I have commanded large forces along the Indo-Tibet border or the Indo-Chinese border, both in Ladakh and in Arunachal Pradesh. So I have a lot of experience in dealing with them. I am also a person who has, I wonder if you're aware that when the Dalai Lama came into India in 1959, the force that I commanded, the Assam Rifles, was the force that escorted him from Tibet into India and escorted him and gave him safe passage to bring the young Dalai Lama in 1959 into India. We have since then looked after the Dalai Lama. I know him personally. I've been in Dharamshala. I have met the Dalai Lama. I have also invited him to various functions. And I must say that this is one issue that I feel is very close to my heart. And once again, and thank you for inviting me. So I plan to cover my talk on three main issues. Mr. Lobsang has already covered a part of that. Firstly, the historical Chinese-Tibetan relationship and the sovereignty brigade, the debate. Who does Tibet belong to? The second is India's views, how it affects India's territory and security ramifications. And the third is, along with this Chinese creep from Tibet into Tibet, there is a Chinese creep into Nepal and what it means to India and the world at large. So let me just start with the Chinese debate, the issue about what do the Chinese say and why do they claim Tibet? So the Tibetan sovereignty debate actually refers to two major political debates. The first political debate is whether or not the various territories that are within the People's Republic of China that are claimed as political Tibet should separate themselves from China and become a new sovereign state. That's the first issue. Many of the points in this political debate rest on the points within the second historical debate as to whether Tibet was actually independent or subordinate to China. And during what parts of its history was it subordinate to China, and whether in the recent history, what was the status of Tibet? It is generally believed that China and Tibet were independent. And that's history shows very clearly that prior to the Yuan dynasty, China and Tibet were independent nations. And in fact, Tibet was a very strong nation. And the Yuan dynasty started from 1271 to 1368. And after that, after 1950 or 1949-50, the People's Republic of China once again entered Tibet and has been holding Tibet through repression since 1949. The People's Republic of China actually asserts that Tibet has been a part of China since the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, as I said. The Republic of China asserts that Tibet was placed under the sovereignty of China during the Qing dynasty, that is 1636 to 1912, which ended the brief Nepalese dynasty invasion and the Treaty of Thapatali in parts of Tibet, that is 1793. And the Tibetan government in exile asserts that Tibet has been an independent state till such time the People's Republic of China invaded Tibet in 1949-50. Now, what do the scholars say? Certain scholars maintain that Tibet and China were ruled by the Mongols during the Yuan dynasty, but the Mongols treated Tibet and China as separate realms, as separate kingdoms under a common rule. Tibet became independent during the Han-led Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644. And Tibet was ruled by China, or subordinate, not ruled, but subordinate to the Manchu-led Qing dynasty during much of the Qing dynasty's years. From 1912 onwards, Tibet became independent. And it was with Tibet that the colonial power of British, which was at that time ruling this part of Asia, it was a part of that time when they signed or initialed the border dispute that continues between India and China till this date. The famous McMahon Line was initialed by the Tibetan officials in 1923 during that particular conference, keeping the line between India and Tibet as the line of the watershed. But this China has not taken into mind. Now, what between 1911 and 1950, when Tibet was free of the People's Republic of China, it functioned as an independent entity. That it did not receive international recognition was because the world at large was fighting. We had the First World War, and after that, the Second World War. And today, in the list of countries and territories to be decolonized, published in 2008, China is not mentioned among the administrating powers only because China has been insisting on a one China policy. No country other than India has recognized the Tibetan government in exile as a legitimate government of Tibet. If you go through certain historical data, I have, because as Veeramala mentioned, I am a PhD. I have done a PhD study on the relationship between India, China, and Nepal. And the very clear 1734 Asian map, which includes China, the Chinese tertiary, and Tibet as separate nations, not as one nation. This is the 1734 map, which is very, very clear. Even the political map of Asia, published in 1890, shows Tibet as a part of the Chinese, shows Tibet as not as a part of the Chinese Qing dynasty. Now, in this issue, what actually happens? China has claimed Tibet and all the territories that it claims Tibet had suzerainty over as a part of Tibet, and therefore a part of the People's Republic of China. This is an absolutely incorrect debate, and China has absolutely no sovereignty over any of the nations or any of the territory that is outside. But what does it mean for the world at large? For the world at large, it shows China as an invasive, as a power that wants to grow through force and through repression. I had a word with the Dalai Lama when he came and met us in Assam in 2017. And we have been talking at great length to many of the Tibetans in the Tibetan government of exile. And they all maintain very clearly that once the present Dalai Lama, and I hope he lives very, very long, passes on, the process of selection of the Dalai Lama would be through the Tibetan government in exile or through the Dalai Lama, and not through the People's Republic of China, as the PRC has been trying to force itself. The second issue, here comes the second issue. How does it affect India and the world at large, and how does it affect our security ramifications? As Mr. Lobsang said, China does not share any boundary between India and China. It is the Tibetan boundaries that China is continuously changing maps based on its will and deciding what it needs to do. This is because Tibet actually holds most of the world's fresh water. And all these larger rivers, the Brahmaputra or the Indus, all these rivers, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, all have their origin from Tibet. And China wants these waters because as the world grows bigger, the population of the world becomes bigger. The resources of the world, especially as far as water is concerned, will become smaller. And China wants to have control over these particular things. Now, what does it mean for Nepal? In 1750, between 1785 to 1790, the Nepalese army invaded Tibet. And the Chinese came in at the Tibetan invitation to defeat the Nepalese army and made them sign the Treaty of Thapatali. During that particular period, during the Treaty of Thapatali, the Chinese had made Nepal also subordinate to them. And the Nepalese king used to be known as the Vanchu. That means subordinate to the Chinese emperor of the Qing dynasty. When Mao spoke in 1950, he talked of these 5 territories being a part of the hand of Tibet. That means the main palm would be the People's Republic of China. One finger was to be Tibet, which has been captured. The second finger was Nepal. The third finger was Ladakh. The fourth finger was a part of what is now is Taiwan. And the fifth finger was Hong Kong. And he said that these are the 5 fingers of China, which must be united. And since that particular time, since the time that Mao Zedong talked of this palm with 5 fingers, since that time, China has been continuously doing what it calls the creep forward. If the world at large was to accept that Tibet belongs to China, which it should not, because there's great repression there. Even after 75 years of Chinese rule over Tibet, if you were to ask the average Tibetan, he would still say that this is repression, this is human rights abuse, and they do not want to be a part of China. Now, similarly, if the world at large accepts this, then tomorrow, because of China's power, China can well walk into Nepal, which is an independent country. And though Nepal doesn't know it yet, China will simply just walk in and not do anything else and not allow anyone to say anything else, because what they have said in 1950 and what Mao has said in 1950 stands still today. They are going to unify all these 5 fingers. So China is not a benign nation. China is a power, is a rising power, and no rising power's rise has ever been peaceful or benign. If China is to be stopped from dominating the world, if it's to be stopped from creeping into smaller countries with small armies, then the world must get together to throw them out of Tibet now and to make sure that the rest of the countries that are a part of the Committee of Nations must be protected. Now, how does India view it? The fact that India gave a place for the Tibetan government in exile to stay in India, and the fact that the Dalai Lama has been in India since 1959, means that the people of India have great sympathy and love and regard for the Tibetan people. That's the first issue. The second issue is the territories of India. that were signed by the Tibetan representative in 1923-24 during the Indo-Tibetan talks remain inviolate, and India has sovereignty over all these territories, which China today claims as its own. For example, China claims the complete Arunachal Pradesh as a part of southern Tibet. So India is determined that we will not let China cross our borders. We are determined that we will hold China to the boundaries that we have signed with Tibet in 1923-24. And we are absolutely clear that we will not allow China to bully us. The issue is that while doing this, while we, the Indian Army and the people of India are strong enough to deal with the resurgence in China and to make sure that China does not have any adventurous plans over India, as China gets stronger, it is going to take over other smaller countries on its periphery. There is no such thing, and I would entreat you all to understand that there is no such example of a benign power rising. China will be aggressive, it will show power, and as it becomes more and more powerful, it will be more and more difficult for the countries in China's periphery to hold China behind. Even today, as you are aware, China is already in Hong Kong. China is threatening Taiwan with reunification, which it might just do in the next 5 years. It is also threatening that the South China Sea is a part of it. It's also deciding where it's going to place its naval forces on the Indian Ocean. So you just have to look at a map to really realize the forward creep of China and how ineffective the world has become dealing with China. The Tibetans are wonderful people. They're fiercely independent-minded. And many times Tibet has indicated its willingness to be a country under China's umbrella, but that its internal systems, its language, its culture must be protected. The important Tibetan ethnic groups in Kham and Amdo must continue to grow, which China is not allowing the people of Tibet to grow. In fact, the 9th Panchen Lama traditionally ruled over 1/3 of Tibet. On the 1st of February 1925, the Panchen Lama attended the preparatory session of the National Construction Meeting. But at the same time, when the Chinese appointed the Panchen Lama as the special cultural commissioner for Western regions, and he spent much of his time teaching and preaching Tibetan doctrines, including the principles of unity and pacification of the border areas. So it is important for us as the people of this world, and I'm so happy that your think tank has decided to call China out and to define its aggression, is that we all get together. And if we all get together, there is no way that China can creep into the smaller independent countries. As far as India is concerned, we are quite clear that we will not permit China to creep forward, at least in our territory. We are quite prepared to hold China where it is, and that we are strong enough to prevent China from any misadventure. Thank you once again for having given me this opportunity to speak at your forum, and I will have to have another assignment to do, but in case there are any questions, I would be most happy to answer them. Thank you very much. Over to you, Viramala.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Legend Shokin Chauhan. you rightly said that Tibet has been an independent country. So then China is an expanding power. Now I think which is threatening, the Hong Kong and South China Sea and Japan and India, and also the Tibetan has been suppressing the freedom movement in Tibet. So it is a very dangerous to the world. The China has a expanding power. So that is one. And also you rightly said, sir, there is also a threat to the Nepal. Nepal also is coming under Chinese influence. So that is also another important factor. So thank you very much, sir, because we had a golden opportunity to hear from the Sikyang, the first Tibetan Central Tibetan Administration president, and now we have legend Shaukin Chauhan, who escorted Dalai Lama in 1959 to Dharamsala. So he was also a very key player. So we have two speakers who have access to this Tibetan issue and issue. So thank you very much, sir. So now we have a third speaker from Indonesia. So we have Dr. Dina Prapto Raharja. She is a former member of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights from 2016 to 2018, and now working as an associate professor in international relations at BINUS University, Jakarta. Dr. Dina earned Doctor of Philosophy in 2007 and Master of Arts in 2005 from the Department of Political Science, the Ohio State University, with a major in comparative politics and minor in international political economy. Her dissertation was about Indonesia, Philippines, and Singapore's governing social security after the Asian financial crisis 1997. Her undergraduate degree is in international relations from the Department of International Relations, Universitas Indonesia. Dr. Dina joined BINUS University in March 2017. She is active in sharing and teaching diplomats, government officials, and military officers in Indonesia and beyond on strategic international affairs and public policy. She is also a prolific writer. She writes for several newspapers like Sindo, the Jakarta Post, Bangkok Post, and Kompas newspapers. Ibu Dina, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes to present your views. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bapak Feramala Anjaya, and also Center for Southeast Asian Studies. Also, Bapak Arisman as the Executive Director of CSEAS for inviting me to speak in this honorable event. It's very interesting that I can sit together with all the important figures from Tibet and those who have followed the issue very closely. I have to admit that I've never been to Tibet. So that's one thing that differentiates me from the other speakers. So what I'm going to share with you today is mostly my perspectives, the helicopter view of how Indonesian government, as well as myself, as someone who has intertwined perspective of being an academics as well as practitioner on the issue of political economy and also human rights, see this issue in Tibet. So when I look at the map of Tibet and see that it's being named as the treasure in the West, Xizang, I think it reflects very much how China itself see Tibet. It's an area that's important agriculturally, though given its limited arable land, it's mostly used as livestock raising. Looking at the history of Tibet, one cannot miss seeing the 17-point agreement that was signed on the 23rd of May, 1951, which later on became a source of controversy And of course, all of this, I remember when I was a younger scholar, we saw the picture of Dalai Lama and how he finally lived in exile, and all the reasons why he has to do so was very much hard to believe. Yeah, we see that as a religious figure, Dalai Lama is also someone very much respected in Indonesia. So overall, we can see that the reality of Tibet is that people living in the area has been facing force, violence, and religion becomes their enemy. Their cultural practices, their cultural difference has been seen as a mistake. The freedom that all of us take for granted as citizens, they can not enjoy. And instead, what they practice in their livelihood, their culture, their religion is seen as signs of being traitors. So I think this is why we are gathering this afternoon to discuss this matter. What can be done? If we look at the numerous attempts that has been done globally across the world to discuss the matter, communication, dialogues with the government of China was one of the things that was put forward. How to improve the socio-political, socio-cultural condition in Tibet. The United Nations, through its fact-finding mission back in 2018, is one of the example of the most recent approach at the multilateral level to take this matter in a peaceful way. The challenge, of course, is that if you see constant violence, accusations that are baseless, arbitrary detention, and then people who are fighting for the right as of their language, for instance, and then being labeled as separatist, this is very challenging to report. So the report of the fact-finding mission was accepted mostly as a list of problems, rather than something that that Chinese government can then follow up and do improve the situation. So it's a problem, I think. In 2021, the United States is signing a law to support Tibet, and as mentioned earlier, there's this Tibetan Policy and Support Act is trying to be more forceful in trying to recognize the presence of Dalai Lama and also Tibetan Buddhist leaders, that decisions made by them should be seen as sovereign, as something that won't be interfered by the Chinese government. And the government of the United States also provide funds to NGOs, non-government organizations, through their projects, programs to support Tibetan communities in order to preserve culture and also develop education. I also see that through this Support Act, the government of America, the United States, is trying to push the Chinese government even more on the issue of human rights. They want to make sure that there's a tit for tat, there's an exchange. Unless you allow the United States to open a consulate in Lhasa, then there will be consequences. So this is much more forceful than the multilateral approach that was done initially back in 2018, for instance, by the United Nations. But these are not the only two approaches there are on the matter of Tibet. Okay, wait, I have a guest. Wait, let me. So sorry for that. Guess that's a challenge of being doing Zoom from here. Anyway, I was just telling that there's another approach in looking at the issue of Tibet, which is the issue of environment, which I think may be something that we must give stronger attention to, as this may give a leeway, give a forceful impact, rather than just talking about the issue of detentions or human rights, which may face some deadlocks. If you look at the issue of Tibet, for years, we've seen the loss of thousands of lakes, the emergence of deserts, the loss of glacier, which is predicted to be gone by 50% in 2050. And you know that the loss of Tibet is the loss of the world for the source of water. And China somehow has its role in making this worse faster, because China also has a program of hydropower that affect the downstream water supplies to the nearby areas. And countries of Asia should be concerned about this. So this is we cannot quite say it's just political matter, but it's a matter of livelihood, not only for Tibetan people, but also for the rest of people in Asia and the world. So if I look at the approach of the Indonesian government, I think the baseline is that the Indonesian government see this as a way of trying to engage with the Chinese government. It respects the standpoint that there's a one China policy issue. And since the 1951 case, Indonesia see Tibet as part of China. And so dialogues, negotiations should be done through China. And maybe you recall back in 2008, there was a debate about the Olympics in Beijing, and the Indonesian government was forced to take a stand there to discuss also about Tibet issue, but Indonesian government decided not to. And within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Indonesia, there's no specific directorate or agency dealing with Tibet. The issue of Tibet on human rights is also not central in any of the directorates of human rights within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So why is this the case? This is not unique, by the way, because the Indonesian government's approach at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is by region. So in terms of human rights, Indonesia never look deeper into just one country, zoom in into one country and its promotion or protection of human rights, but rather look at the patterns of human rights, and then they go to multilateral calls, if at all. But in terms of how you move forward with the call, engagements and dialogues is always preferred rather than singling out country like the United States does. So recently, I haven't seen any new statements or approaches made by the Indonesian government because I guess there are many ways to answer why Indonesia is doing so. But the key here is that every country has their own priority as well. So we somehow need to respect that. So here are my closing parts, which I'd like to raise to you, the discussion points. These are the things that I think may provoke us further in looking at the issue of Tibet, and not being stalled at the issue of fear against China as the rising power, for instance, because if we look at China with fear, what we will get instead is a panic feeling, which may mislead us in moving forward. China itself is rising and it's big, but trust me, I don't think it can rise alone. It still needs the cooperation of many countries around it. And then, so the first point I discuss here is about human rights approach. as someone who has been working on this issue on the technical levels, at the civil society level, as well as representing the government in ASEAN, human rights approach is not the sole approach available, I think, to bring Tibet's suffering to the international attention. Why do I say this? Because the word human rights itself is not fully understood most of the time by the politicians and by decision makers. Once we use this term, there should be a very clear common understanding about what we are talking about. And at this stage of the dialogue, I don't think bringing in this approach would be effective. Why? Second line, I think people living under coercive authoritarianism tend to have a limited network of ideas on how do you deal with coercion. The feeling of fear is already immense. So if we focus on violations, listing all kinds of violations, inspirations to get out from the problem will tend to be very limited. So what they need in Tibet is a way to empower themselves to feel that they have something through science, through arts, through economic operations, through network that they can work with, so that they can feel that they can face this authoritarian regime effectively. The third point that I'd like to make is that reform against authoritarianism never happen in a night. And it usually requires some kind of power agreements with those in power. I come from a country of 270 million in population with over 150 something ethnic groups. And a lot of them are agriculture in its background. A lot of them are also coming from a poor situation. So when reform happens politically in Indonesia 25 years ago, the challenge is very immense, not only to bring the issue forward, but to make sure that all these people who used to be just watching and left behind, they participate in this reform movement. What we have to aim is trying to avoid status quo, to make sure that people in Tibet are not afraid of any change. I say this because sometimes we take it for granted, thinking that people want change. But people who has lived under very bad condition, they tend to step back for change. So are we ahead here in terms of inspiring people that change is good for them? People comes with different levels of hierarchy in society, or do the more better off parts of the society in Tibet inspire them for change? So the mapping of power is really essential here, is really needed. I think someone who is in exile is one part of the story, but there's also local leaders that we have to map to make sure that we can tap the best out of Tibetans. Last, I would like to highlight the point that China and US debate at this point is entering a very critical and not so productive phase. So if we discuss this matter in terms of where the two countries are, China versus US, it may not be very productive for our cause, for the cause of making sure that Tibetans are more empowered and can face the problems that they have in a more productive way. Being in the typhoon of China and US debate may shrink the courage. Again, I keep repeating the point about being courageful, being brave, being encouraged to face change, because I think there are still lots of steps that Tibetans have to encounter in order to enjoy some recognition and more peaceful, acceptable situation within the area at this point. Hopefully this shed some lights and inspire you. Thank you so much. And again, once I'm sorry for the disruption in the middle of my presentation. just now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dina. Because we heard from your views, they are very interesting. Because you said that Tibetans have to empower themselves for expecting change, to bring change, because they are also suffering from their, their language is discouraged, and their religion is discouraged, and also they want to, the Chinese government wants to create a new generation of patriots, within quotes, they're loyal to the Communist Party and others, and also their education is also, there are many, almost 1 million Tibetans are also suffering in vocational, military style vocational schools. So this is happening. But you raised one important point, the environment, because Tibet is a very strategic area, because it is the source of the, because people call it the third pole, because it has a source of the many important rivers, like for example Yangtze, Mekong River, and also the Satluj, Indus, and Brahmaputra, and so many rivers. So overall, an estimate of 20% of the world's population rely on these Tibet sourced waters, and also 40% of Asians live on this water coming from the Tibet. So it is very important, but unfortunately the Chinese government has been destroying, and it is destroying the environment, which causes a lot of problems by building so many dams, etc., etc. So it is a very important point. Thank you, Dr. Dina. So now we will have another speaker who is also a very interesting speaker from India, because Tibetans are not only the people of ethnic minority who are suffering in China, because we do have Uyghurs in Xinjiang, as well as Mongols, and also other ethnic Turkish groups. So many minorities. So what kind of policies China adopts to deal with these ethnic minorities, because most of these major Uyghurs and as well as Tibetans were independent states, it was forcibly annexed and incorporated into China. So that's why now we can hear from Dr. Mahesh Ranjan Debata. So he is an associate professor at the Special Center for Inter-Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, New Delhi. So his areas of specialization are Xinjiang, Inner Asia, and Eurasia. He obtained his MA, MPhil, and PhD degrees from JNU. He has been working as an assistant professor at JNU since 2007. He was also a visiting professor at the School of International Education, Yinchuan University of Energy, Ningxia, China, and a guest professor at the Center for Business Anthropology, School of Continuing Education, Tianjin University, Finance and Economics, Tianjin, China. He is also a prolific writer in various journals and the author of his famous book, China's Minorities, Ethnic Religious Separatism in Xinjiang. So now the floor is yours, Dr. Mahesh. You have 20 minutes to present your views. Thank you.
Thank you, and namaskar from India. And I'm really grateful to the organizers, especially my dear friend, and I'm actually not a specialist on Tibet, but I will speak a little bit on Tibet and Xinjiang. I have been working on the issue of ethnic minorities in China and the Chinese policies towards the ethnic minorities. And so with the permission of the chair, may I share the screen? I have prepared some graphics, some caricatures, some photos. I think through that I want to express my views with regard to my paper, and hope you can see my presentation. Mr. Viramala, can you see my picture?
Yeah.
So, just 1 second, I think. Yeah. So three minorities areas, minority groups in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Inner Mongolia, they have been demanding separate homeland for themselves, and they want to get freedom from the yoke of China. You can see in the map that is East Turkestan, which is known as Xinjiang by the Chinese, and the Inner Mongolia. And then you have, you can see in the map, this is East Turkestan, this is Tibet, and this is Inner Mongolia. And in this map also, you can see East Turkestan, Tibet, and Inner Mongolia, this region. So these three. And the intention of showing this picture at the outset takes me back to some almost 25 years ago in 1993 in the Columbia University in the United States. Three important, the leaders of these three important ethnic minorities in China were assembled to have a roadmap how to get freedom out of China. And in fact, the Dalai Lama, the supreme leader of Tibetan movement, could not attend the conference. But later on, even in the last 25 years, these three minority group or the diaspora organization or the leadership, they have not been able to take advantage or mileage out of the movement that started some 25 years ago. So the conclusion I say here that one of my recommendations, which I will speak at the end of this presentation, is that there should be collective effort by these three, the leadership of these three minorities, so that they can be able to, they can put pressure on the international community, they can mobilize the international, the world opinion against the Chinese, and can achieve freedom out of China. The next is that you can see I have deliberately put the color of the, you can see XUAR in the blue color, that is the color of the flag of the East Turkestan, the TAR is the yellow, and the blue is the Inner Mongolia, and PRC, of course, in the right, the red color. There is a red star over all these three minority areas. And here you can see how China's policies in the last 7 decades have been against these three, and how the human rights of these three minority nationalities have been violated on and off. And here you can see, and the Chinese do not buy the important essential ingredient of the United Nations human rights. Sorry. Rather, they deliberately take up cudgels against these three minority groups, especially the Tibetans and the Uyghurs in the last 7 decades or so. Here you can see they have a bloody hand in Tibet, also in Uyghur, in, of course, recently last couple of years ago in Hong Kong, and now they are also knocking at the doors of the world community to show that what they have done in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Inner Mongolia, they have done the right thing there. And the first and foremost thing did the Mao government, when they came into being in 1949, was to silence, how to make the minorities silent. And they have deliberately devised some policies. You can say sometimes that is carrot and sometimes it's stick policy, but most of the time in the last 7 decades, it's a stick policy, how to dominate, how to oppress, and how to suppress the minority groups in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Inner Mongolia. Here you can see through the process of Hanification, sending the Han people from the mainland to the minority dominated areas, that you have seen in 1956, just a year before the Great Leap Forward. There was a clarion call by the Mao government and his brigade, that how to Hanify the minority areas. That is why they gave a call that the go west, young Han. West means the Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, other, because more than 70% of the minority groups in China, they live in the western part of the country. And Tibet, of course, Tibet and Xinjiang, they bear they bore the brunt, and there's a clear-cut racial segregation in both the areas. I had the opportunity to visit Xinjiang more than 4 to 5 times. I've never been to Tibet. I have clearly seen, for example, if you go to a boulevard in a small city or any city, every evening after the supper time, the Chinese people, they go for a dance. There's a post-supper workout, you can say. And if you visit some of the places in Xinjiang, like Hotan, Kashgar, Yarkand, Aksu, Kucha, Urumqi, I have been to these places. I have seen that there is a clear-cut division. That on one side, you see the Chinese are dancing to the tune of the English music, and the other side, you see the minority people, particularly the Uyghurs, they are dancing to the tune of their typical Central Asian, Persian, or the Indian music. So it was a deliberate attempt to colonize both these important regions, you can say, on the western part of the country, the Xinjiang and Tibet. And there is absolutely no freedom in Tibet. As I see, that is, the Tibetans cannot vote, they cannot protest, they cannot even leave that land. And I have no idea, perhaps the last 3 speakers who spoke eloquently on the issue of Tibet have the better idea, better knowledge about this. But what I have heard, what I have seen also in some of the what I have read from some of the important literatures also, that I have seen, there is absolutely no freedom. The same thing also happens there in Xinjiang also. Particularly in the case of Xinjiang, I have seen that to offer a namaz 5 times a namaz, which is the basic thing in Islam, you need to get a permission from the local authorities. Even to go to the nearby mosques also, you have to register in the Xinjiang Islamic Association. So these are some of the issues, and there are so many other issues which have been highlighted in many literature, in the newspapers, in the books, and the journals also. You must have gone through that one. I don't want to repeat those. So, and then Tibet during the 2008, when the uprising started against the movement, started against the Chinese, and that was the Beijing Olympic time in Olympic, and they put as they took stringent action against these 2 minorities, particularly Uyghurs and the Tibetans also. I remember just a few days before in Kashgar, there was, in the pretext of combating the few local rebels, they started a strike hard campaign in these areas in Xinjiang, and also again in Tibet. And who was you can see who was the architect of genocide both in Tibet and Xinjiang. You can see the person who was the Chen Chuanchung, who was the head of the CCP party head of these 2. He was earlier there in Tibet, and he had taken the credit of stabilizing Tibet, and he was given another chance to stabilize Xinjiang also. He came to Xinjiang in 2014, and 2014 onwards, the situation in Xinjiang was beggar's description. It cannot be described in words also. And in the next couple of slides, I can show what happened in Xinjiang. Here you see, absolutely no mercy against the Uyghurs. They should be killed, they should be put behind the bars, and blah, 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 whatever stringent or any stern action against this. And I remember in 2014, when just before just after the Belt and Road Initiative was launched in Astana in Kazakhstan, and he visited Xinjiang, which has become the linchpin of the Belt and Road Initiative strategy. So he clearly opened, there should be a great wall of steel against the Uyghurs, against any anti-state and anti-national or anti-Chinese elements. So this was the policy, and particularly during the C period, and in the last 1 decade or so. You can see, as rightly pointed out by many Western scholars, or also the local scholars also, it is It is a kind of concentration camp, which we had heard. I haven't seen, but we had heard during the 1945 when the Nazi were in power under the leadership of Hitler. So they claim it is a re-education camp, but these are actually the concentration camp. And there you see how the history is repeating itself. And they claim, the Chinese people, even though they claim that the Uyghurs are the happiest in the world, they have made so many propaganda, they have brought out so many white papers, they have also promoted so many people, they have brought many people outside. For example, you can see they invited the Saudi king, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, to visit that place where the crown prince openly, vehemently criticized the Uyghur terrorist and gave a clarion call to make this land terrorist free, you can say. So what happened in Xinjiang, even in Tibet, that you can see that these two regions have become under strict surveillance of the Chinese. You have seen anywhere you go, you will find the closed circuit CCTV cameras also. I remember that in after 2009, the 5th July 2009 Urumqi incident happened. I had the opportunity to visit in 2013, I think. And at that point of time, that many people told me, even I have seen some of the old pictures, that there was very few CCTV cameras in there. But only in the Urumqi city, after this 5th July incident, more than 30,000 CCTV cameras were installed in to keep a vigil over the any anti-Chinese activities also. And they have also done damage to the religious part also. They have taken out the religious freedom. They have put the many people, their family, or any diaspora organized people of belonging to the diaspora organization abroad into the concentration camp also. They have like decimated, they have demolished the many historical cultural buildings also, and they have used, even many people say that there is a kind of organ harvesting. If one person is anti-Chinese, be he or she Tibetan or Xinjiang, he will be put into a particular specialized hospital where all the important organs of his body will be taken away, and he'll be almost, if the important organs like liver and the heart or anything is taken away, he will not be able to get his life back. So he will die. So this was also the one of the stern actions. So it was against the religious practices, it was against the cultural identity, it was against their all other identity and all other actions also. Even the local authorities in Xinjiang, they brought out some instructions, the strict instructions not to name their children. So for example, Saddam, you cannot put the name Saddam as their own children also. This was also some of them. If you have bear, you cannot ride a local city bus also. These are some of the restrictions. There are many also. I will not, because of that. And there are a disappearance of the Uyghurs. This was a literature brought out by the Uyghurs Human Rights Project. And it shows that the Uyghur intellectuals and the cultural elites. I will, I remember one gentle lady who was a professor in the Xinjiang University. I met her in CSEAS in London, and again later on had the opportunity to meet her in Urumqi in 2013. There is absolutely no idea about, perhaps she is disappeared, where she is, no idea, because there was a concern by some of the Western scholars. They had also written, they had made a fervent appeal to the Chinese government to release her, but there is no news about her. So, and in addition to that, the UN also, the UN Human Rights Council, the US, and they have also decided, they have also already called these activities by the Chinese in Xinjiang and Tibet as genocide. It is also, for example, in 2020, the United States brought about a bill, the Uyghur bill. Okay. And but the suffering, you can see the 2022 Beijing Olympics, the suffering. Inside here, you can see the Tibetans are there, the Inner Mongols are there, the Uyghurs are there. The suffering goes on still. Still they are at the receiving end. And here the local people, the diaspora organization, the other sympathizers of Uyghurs and Tibetans, they have also knocked the door of the United Nations, the world community. But absolutely, there are absolutely no impact on China. China has been very rigid, and you see some of the pictures also you can see when some 22 Western nations, including European countries and the USA, they appealed the Human Rights Council against the activity, the Chinese excesses against Uyghurs and Tibetans. More than 37 people you can see in the next picture also, more than 37, and most of them are Muslim countries also. They do not sympathize with the Muslim Uyghurs also. More than 37 countries, they went against these 22 hapless Western players, and still China maintains that what they have been doing in Xinjiang and in Tibet, they are doing the right thing. And they also, even I remember I had met one gentleman from the Tsinghua University who is a professor in IR. He told me that we are following the realism of the West. So what is the summum bonum of realism? That is the national interest, national security, or whatever you say. So it is our duty and responsibility to save our country from internal problems or outside attacks also. So no outside intervention cannot be proved. So what we are doing there is to safeguard our border. Xinjiang is an important part. Tibet is also an important part. Xinjiang has border with some 8 countries. So we have relationship with 8 countries. So we cannot just support any kind of movement, the freedom movement by Uyghurs and Tibet in those minority dominated areas. And most important is the Chinese money power. You see, I just give one example that in Thailand, because we are now discussing in the Southeast Asian nation, this important think tank of Southeast Asia. And I remember when some of the Uyghur cadres who were imprisoned in the Guantanamo Bay, at the behest of the United States, Thailand was agreed to give asylum to some of the Uyghurs. But the Chinese money, you can see, the Thailand people, they asked for $5,000 per person. But I remember, and $3.8 billion of Chinese investment in it. And the Thailand government did not have any option but to hand over these hapless Uyghurs to the Chinese, who were later on executed by the Chinese authorities in Xinjiang, in a public hanging, you can say. And that also you have seen in the case of Pakistan, who is a the all-weather friend of China. They haven't uttered a single word against the Chinese. They know. Even there was an issue of like many of the wives of the many Pakistani traders in Kashgar who were Uyghurs. They were imprisoned by Chinese, but the then government, the Imran Khan government, did not utter a single word against the Chinese. Rather, I had seen, if you go through the I have also written one of the papers about how Pakistan, Uyghur Xinjiang factor in the Pakistan-China relations. I have mentioned clearly in that Pakistan, in the many Pakistan leaders like Pervez Musharraf, like you can say the Hina Rabbani Khar, also any other important Pakistan leaders, whenever they visit Xinjiang, China, they go to Xinjiang, and from there they give a call to the Uyghurs not to indulge in any anti-Chinese activity. So this was the Chinese prowess, you can say, the money power, the military power, whatever you say. So at the end, I make a few recommendations because I have heard 3 important, very fascinating presentations, and who have brought out new things about the Tibetan issue. And what I suggest that if at all what can be done by the diaspora community, the Uyghurs who live inside Xinjiang or outside Xinjiang also, there should be collective effort. The first thing is that and the Uyghur diaspora people, the Tibetan diaspora people, and the Inner Mongolia diaspora people should come together, should put out a single strategy how to deal with the Chinese activities there. And of course, there should be the international community also should a generous, sympathetic view of the issue and take up cudgels against the Chinese excesses in those areas. And most important, because the Indonesia is the population-wise is the #1 Muslim country in the world, so it should also come forward and also send like request the Chinese or be part of the international community to browbeat the Chinese activities there, Chinese access there. And last but not the least is India. Of course, I remember whenever I meet the Uyghur people, I have met many Uyghurs all across the globe. Whenever I meet them, the one thing they say that the only country, the only people, Hindustan, they call India as Hindustan, only country in the world which can bail us out, which has the prowess right now, which is a competitor of China at the present global order also, and it has the capability to counter China and has the ability to bail us out from the Chinese morass also. And last but not the least, the OIC, for example, the Muslim organizations, Muslim regional organizations, groupings, they should not have any double standards. These are their own brothers, their own fraternity, and they should also as part of the international community, they also persuade Chinese to stop the genocidal activities against the Uyghurs and the Tibetan. Thank you so much for your attention. Namaskar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mahesh Ranjan. You have suggested a very good idea that all the exile communities of Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Inner Mongolians, they have to launch a common struggle and united struggle against the People's Republic of China, because they have been suffering for a long time. And also you mentioned that there is no freedom in these three areas where the ethnic minorities are in the live. So I remember one in Tibet. Now, I mean, in Tibet, also in Xinjiang, also in Inner Mongolia, also the Chinese government has been putting a lot of CCTVs and they monitor everybody's personal activities. And also, even in Tibet, if a person has a Dalai Lama on his phone, it is a offensive act. And also, they monitor everything. So it is a completely police state of China in these three provinces. And also, especially the Tibet. Tibet is a so beautiful country. It is a plateau and it is so many beautiful places. But after occupation of Tibet from 1950 to 1980, it was closed to foreigners. It was closed to foreigners. It was closed, no access to foreigners. But only in 1980, then they started allowing foreign tourists, but only they have to seek a special permission, a Tibet permit. It is called a Tibet permit. But at the same time, the Tibetans who live in their place, they are not allowed to visit other places in China. So what kind of freedom the China is giving to them? So thank you, Mr. Mahesh. So now the last speaker, I mean, of course, I will be the last speaker because today I have to act in a dual role as a moderator as well as a speaker. So my name is Veeramalla Anjaya. I work as a senior research fellow at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, which is a prominent think tank in Indonesia. And I studied like Dr. Mahesh. I am also an alumni of JNU. I did my MPhil degree. Then I work as a journalist. Now still I am working as a freelance journalist, as well as I worked for the Jakarta Post from almost 25 years. So that is my brief profile. And now, let's go to my presentation. Yeah, my title of my presentation is Tibetan Struggle for Freedom from Chinese Rule. Next slide, please. Yeah, so Tibet is a large area. It is a 2.5 million square kilometers land, and also its population is 6 million in various provinces of China. The Tibet, a Buddhist country which is under the occupation of Communist China, is known as the roof of the world. Tibetans have their own religion, language, and culture. Trade. Tibet has an estimated population of 6 million who live in various provinces in China, including the Tibet Autonomous Region. There are now 3.65 million Tibetans living in Thar, the second largest province in China. Tibet is also known as the world's third pole. It holds the third largest source of ice water in the world after the Arctic and Antarctic poles. It is the source of Asia's largest rivers, including Brahmaputra, Ganges, Satluj, Indus, and Mekong and Yangtze rivers. More than 1.5 billion people across Asia rely on water that flows from Tibet's glaciers. Agriculture and animal husbandry are the main economic resources in Tibet. Next slide, please. Yeah. Chinese communists claim that Tibet is an integral part of China. Tibetans and their government in exile maintain that Tibet is an independent state which is under unlawful occupation. While it is true that various Chinese dynasties have on several occasions interfered in Tibetan affairs, it is equally true that various Tibetan rulers have invaded China or otherwise exercised influence in Chinese affairs. On the occasion in 763 AD, Tibetan troops have even occupied Chang'an, the then Chinese capital. They deposed the Chinese emperor who was hostile towards Tibetans and appointed the son of another branch of the royal family as emperor. The traditional boundary between Tibet and China was demarcated by the peace treaty of 821, when it was decided that the two countries shall never interfere in each other's affairs, believing that the Chinese shall be happy in the land of China and Tibetans shall be happy in the land of Tibet. Tibet has a history of more than 2,000 years. During most of it remained as an independent kingdom and extended its influence over neighboring countries and peoples. Sometimes Tibet come under the influence of foreign rulers like Mongol Khans, Gorkhas of Nepal, Manchu emperors, and British rulers of British India. Tibet was under Mongol and Manchu rule during the 13th and 18th centuries only. Next slide, please. In 1911, when China became a republic after imperial rule, Tibet was not part of that republic. 2 years later, on February 13, the 13th Dalai Lama proclaimed Tibet as an independent and sovereign state. It has its own national flag, currency, stamps, passports, and army from 1930 to 1950. There were many foreign diplomatic missions in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. The Chinese People Liberation Army invaded Tibet in 1949. It defeated the Tibetan army, which is an indication that Tibet was an independent country, and annexed Tibet by 1950, therefore incorporating it into China. To cover up military annexation, the Tibetan government was forced to sign an unequal treaty called the 17-Point Agreement on Measures for the Peaceful Liberation of Tibet on May 23, 1951. China claims that the 14th Dalai Lama sent a telegram to ratify the 17th Agreement in October 1951, but later the same Dalai Lama repudiated the agreement and mentioned that it was signed under duress, as there were 40,000 PLA troops in Tibet at the time. Many countries protested China's invasion of Tibet, like what our friend from the Harvard University said, that the Philippines was in the front line of condemning the Chinese aggression of Tibet, Thailand, and the US and many other countries condemned the Chinese aggression of Tibet. From 1950 to 59, Chinese troops in Tibet placed numerous restrictions on religion. There were fears that Dalai Lama would be arrested and freedom of expression was curtailed. Many Han Chinese had also moved into Tibet, smoldering resentment at the strain on Tibet's resources from the influx of Chinese soldiers and Han Chinese was inflamed in 1956 by reports of fighting oppression in districts east of the upper Yangtze River outside the administration of Lhasa. Refugees from the fighting in the east carried out guerrilla war against Chinese in central Tibet. Next slide, please. On March 10, 1959, which is a Tibetan uprising day, which is a very worrying sign for China, which began as a small protest in Lhasa and spread throughout the Tibet like a wildfire immediately. Due to violent crackdowns on by police and military, the uprising turned violent. It was a major revolt against communist rule. On March 12, 1959, thousands of Tibetan women took to the street to protest and seek independence. Every year, the Tibetan people commemorate March 12 as the Tibetan Women Uprising Day. So the March is the coming next month is a very dangerous sign for People's Republic of China and the Communist Party. The Dalai Lama and thousands of his followers secretly escaped Tibet and took asylum in India in 1959. Tibetan refugees established their government in exile in Dharamsala in 1960. This was one of the main reasons for the Sino-Indian War in 1962. Next slide, please. Tibet was then divided and integrated into various Chinese provinces. Initially, Tibet only had 3 regions, Lobsang, Kham, and Amdo. However, China tiered them into various parts and incorporated them into Han majority provinces like Gansu, Qinghai, Sichuan, and Yunnan. By mixing certain parts of Western Kham and Lobsang, China had created the Tibet Autonomous Region in 1965. Currently, to China, Tibet refers to only this TAR, Tibet Autonomous Region, and not Kham and Amdo. From 1963 to 1980, Tibet was closed to foreign visitors, an inhuman act of the authoritarian Chinese regime. Even though foreigners are not allowed to visit a region, Tibet entry permit is required. There are many popular tourist destinations in Tibet, including Potala Palace, Namso Lake, and Mount Everest. Between 1987 and 89, thousands of Tibetans staged a series of protests in various towns and cities seeking independence for their motherland from China. As usual, China crushed the protests violently, killing around 450 people. The casualties were only estimates, as China never announced any official figures. According to the next slide, please. Yeah, according to the Freedom House, Chinese authorities severely restrict freedom of assembly as part of the government's intensified stability maintenance policies in Tibet. Control the surveillance of public gatherings extend beyond major towns, even non-violent protesters, and rapidly and often violently dispersed and punished. Tibet has been ranked by the Freedom House as the least free country in the world, along war-ravaged Syria, for many years in a row. This is the map of the Tibet, and also you can see the beauty of the Tibet, the snow mountains and the palace and the people. Here is the next slide, please. According to Dalai Lama, China has killed a total of 1.2 million Tibetans since 1950 during periods of repression and martial law, although China disputes this, because it is only a 6 million people, but out of 6 million, 1 million people were killed. See, how repressive the regime was. On March 14, 2008, The brutal suppression of peaceful protests led to the destruction of Han Chinese shops and deadly attacks on Han Chinese in Lhasa by Tibetans. The riots spread to Tibetan populated regions of Western Chinese provinces. Chinese troops used guns and tanks to crush the rebellion. Thousands of Tibetans were detained, beaten, or shot. It took 13 days for the PLA to recapture Tibet. There is no official data on the number of casualties during the uprising. Many historians put the figures between 2,000 to 85,000 from the Tibetan side, with no estimates on how many people, how many troops and Han civilians were killed. There was a complete news blockade on the uprising. Since 2009, numerous Tibetans have committed self-immolation in several Tibetan towns and cities to protest Chinese rule. Next slide, please. Yeah. In communist China, nobody is free. Tibetans have fewer civil and political rights than most, from mass public surveillance of Lhasa's busy streets to the torture that takes place in Tibet's hidden detention centers. The Chinese government subjects Tibetans to suffocating control and violence. Every aspect of Tibetan life is under siege. Dissent, protest, or simply wishing the Dalai Lama happy birthday or having a Tibetan flag on your phone will turn you into a criminal. Tibetans must censor themselves to avoid imprisonment. From a legal point of view, Tibet has not lost its statehood to this day. It is an independent state under illegal occupation. But even after 73 years of illegal occupation, China has failed to suppress Tibetan dissent despite its careful strategy to destroy the Tibetan identity by undermining Tibetan culture and religion and denying its people their human rights every day. Tibetans continue their fight for freedom from Chinese rule until this day. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, now we have a question and answer session. Yeah. We have a question from the audience. Is really Tibet an independent country? Is really Tibet an independent country? Who wants to answer? Ibu Dina?
I think it was you who discussed it lengthily about.
Yeah.
Tibet.
Yeah. So is really Tibet an independent country?
It's an autonomous region as per the agreement of 1950. Was it 1950? I forgot the exact year. 1951. Yeah. But of course, there's a deep controversy regarding this agreement that was not considered an agreement, but rather a force. A force and violence follows that makes them has to agree. The Tibetans have to agree. So I guess that's the big debate being discussed here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dina. Mahesh, you want to add something?
No, thank you. If you have any question, then I would love to answer the questions.
Yeah. The question is really Tibet an independent country?
That's $1 million question. And let me just, if you see from a very practical point of view, of course, the Tibetans inside Tibet and outside Tibet also, they believe that it is an independent country and being occupied by the Chinese for the last 7 decades or so. The same feeling is there also in India also. But if you look at from the practical point of view, and it is an integral part of China. For example, if you see from the Indian point of view, I say that in 2003, when our Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited China, and there was a Beijing declaration. In that Beijing declaration, the Prime Minister clearly said, very candidly said that Tibet is an integral part of China. So that means, and we have been following the One China policy for the last so many years. Forget about the reasons, whatever it may be, but and there is absolutely the international community also recognizes the same thing. Perhaps they have followed what the Chinese have been maintaining for the last. It is a core area of China, and that also is being felt all across the globe. So if you, from the practical point, if you see, then that is a part of, and you never know when it will become an independent state again. And so, we can easily demarcate between the practical and the theoretical thing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mahesh. We have another question. Tibetans can practice their religion freely in China. Because you also experienced what kind of religious freedom in Xinjiang. So now the question is, Tibetans can practice their religion freely in China.
See, there is there are some religious association. I have very little knowledge about the Buddhist religious association. I know about the Xinjiang Islam. There is a Chinese Islamic association. Under the ambit of that, wherever and there are the Chinese, the Muslims, there are 13 Muslim communities in China. So you can find them in Ningxia, in Xinjiang, in, I don't know about Tibet, some other places also. So they follow the dictates of the local Islamic association. For example, to go to the mosque in Xinjiang, you need to get yourself registered in that Xinjiang Islamic Association. It was not done today. It was in the 1960s also. And I have no idea absolutely, but whatever I have heard from my friends, whatever I have read from the literature, whatever I have listened and seen in some of the news clippings also, that it seems that there is a little freedom there in Tibet as well. And because they cannot vote. Suppose in India we are democracy, we have that any citizen in the country can vote. As I had shown in one graphic also, they cannot vote. They cannot even leave their country freely. For example, I have seen in the case of the Uyghurs also, there is a concept, they say weaponization of passports. Suppose from China, you go abroad, the passport has a validity period for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And you can go abroad, you can profess your ideology, you can say against the Chinese, but ultimately, because you are not a citizen of any other country, for the renewal of your passport, you have to come back to China. Once you are coming back to China, you are gone. You are done, you are gone. So that is why it is very difficult to say, because the restrictions on the religious freedom in particular in Xinjiang and Tibet, particularly during the Cultural Revolution period, it was harsh. Because many mosques, many temples, many Buddhist pagodas are also destroyed. So that is continuing there in the present under the present dispensation as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mahesh. Ibu Dina, you want to add something?
I think the practice, I think we should refer to the reports as being documented, yeah, by the various individuals involved in the UN special rapporteur on the matter. So the details are there that people are experiencing difficulties to practice their religion, and not only that, using their only language and also their cultural signs and presence is already considered a problem by the government as possible being a traitor. So that's I cannot imagine having such suspicion surrounding you can be considered a freedom.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dina. Actually, we have seen reports of there were a lot of restrictions. There are a lot of restrictions on Tibetans who want to practice religion, because the first thing is their monasteries were destroyed. The first thing is many monasteries, and also they destroyed many statues. statues also. Every day, every month or every week, we have reports of this place, that place. The statues have been removed, and also there was also indoctrination from the Chinese Communist Party to train some monks to be loyal to the Communist Party and to loyal to the China. So so that's why there is but they were do it on with force. So it is a very difficult situation. So now we have another question. This is for Ibu Dina. What is the human rights situation in Tibet now? Human rights situation.
Human rights situation is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think to answer that, one needs to understand what human rights is all about. Yeah, human rights, number one, would recognize that all individuals should be treated equally because they are born equally, and we cannot at any point force and exclude one of their rights that are born with them. So religion, gender, cultural preferences, even political preferences is embedded in any individuals. Even if you disagree with one standpoint, the thing that you have to do if you have human rights approach, if you care about human rights, is to discuss with them, to you agree to disagree. So you have to continue treating them with dignity. That's the underlying practice of human rights. So that you don't see happening in Tibet. What you see is people are being forced, being intimidated, and even when they perform a peaceful demonstration, they also get detained and tortured. And so that's just, you know, a violation of human rights right there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dina. Now we have another question. What international community should do to help Tibetan people? So this is for Mr. Dr. Mahesh, because not only Tibet, in Uyghur also, Xinjiang also, what international community should do?
Yes, in fact, international community means the entire, like the entire world community, you can see. But as I had told you during my presentation about the double standards maintained by some of the countries.
Yeah.
For example, we have seen the OIC. OIC says many things about Kashmir, but doesn't mean a single word about the Uyghurs. This is the double standard we say. I mean, they should at least, and similarly, the major countries like Western countries, USA, and the European countries also, they should not also maintain any kind of double standards. For example, in the case of Uyghurs, I have seen that till from 1949 onwards, till 2001, the approach of the United States towards the Uyghurs, towards China is a roller coaster. And sometimes in favor of Uyghurs, sometimes against the Uyghurs. And the post-2001 period when the global war on terrorism happened and that was under the leadership of the United States in Afghanistan. And China was one of the countries that joined the global war on terrorism. And after that, I think in October, just 5 days after, United States put one of the Uyghur organizations, they called it the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, in the global terror list. But now in 2019-20, they say that it is no more a terrorist group. But that is an irrefutable fact by the United Nations report itself, that it is a terrorist group. It was active in the Syria, it was also had worked with the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. It had worked with the Uzbekistan Islamic Movement. It had worked with the ISIS in Turkey also, because there is a special report by the American Foundation, New American Foundation report on this. But later on in 2020, when because of whatever interest, whatever mutual issues, conflict between China and USA, they had started browbeating China and now using the Uyghur card. So this should not have been done. If something is happening and the world community, the international community understand the gravity of the situation, it should take a step. It should go for the sympathize with the people, the victims, and also tell the concerned member of the United Nations that you should refrain from committing any excesses against your own people. Okay, but when you say, the question arises when you say that they are, I mean, this is very, very interesting, also very contradictory. The China itself says that you are part of our own country, but again commits excesses against their own people also. Okay, they say that Tibet and Uyghur, they are our members, they are our citizens, but again you commit excesses against these people. So this is very contradictory. So this is a 3-4 way process. You see, the first thing is that the Chinese government, they have to take a call. They have to take a sympathetic view. And of course, whenever it commits any excesses against the national minorities, particularly the Uyghur, Tibetans, and the Inner Mongols, the international community is there. Okay. So, and then you see that there is a number game in the Human Rights Council, 20-37. Okay. So that should not be, the first thing is that should not be any double standard. Number 2, today your friend, tomorrow your enemy. Okay. Number 3, that there should be a sympathetic view towards the victim anywhere in the world, be it India, be it Indonesia, be it China, be it anywhere in the world. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. Thank you very much, all the speakers, Mr. Lobsang Sangay and Lieutenant Shaukin Chauhan, and also Dr. Deena Prapto Raharja and Dr. Mahesh Ranjan Devata, and all the participants and also the spectators. Thank you very much. So we have a very wonderful webinar. So thank you very much. Jihan, you want a group photo?
Yes, Pa.
Yeah, okay, group photo. Okay, group photo. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, this is it.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, thank you, Pa.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you,
you.
thank you,
Vivian.
thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr.
Yeah,
Mahesh.
yeah, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Viramala, for
Yeah,
the
thank you.
opportunity.
Yeah, thank
you
you,
so
thank
much.
you,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.